Welcome to the Clear-Sighted Career Online Learning Series and this webinar on successfully navigating workplace conflicts. My name is Sharon Kane and I serve as the Director of Professional and Academic Programs in Notre Dame's Alumni Association. Conflict in the workplace is all but inevitable, as we work long and hard and often have differing and strong ideas and opinions as we work on behalf of our organizations. For most of us, we associate negative emotions with the word conflict and certainly the experience of it. Often our flight or flight instincts kick in and perhaps don't serve us well. What if you were able to see more clearly how conflict can lead to expanded thinking and learning? This webinar is for individuals who are interested in understanding the constructive role that conflict in the workplace can play and want to build their awareness and their skill when these situations arise. So in this webinar, we'll begin by defining conflict, examining causes, and looking at how to recognize and respond to conflict in the workplace. We'll share resources, best practices, and those will include online assessments that can reveal your own individual conflict style. To help us with this, we have our presenter, Dr. Amanda McKendry, who's an Associate Teaching Professor of Management in the Fanning Center for Business Communication that's within the Mendoza College of Business here at Notre Dame. Dr. McKendry is an expert in this area of conflict management and communication, crisis communication. She teaches speaking and writing and other courses to our undergraduate and graduate business students. In 2014, she co-authored a book that's titled Conflict Between Persons, The Origins of Leadership. Dr. McKendry received her BA from Chatham, her MPA from the University of Pittsburgh, and earned her PhD in rhetoric from Duquesne University. So Amanda, welcome to the Clear-Sighted Career Learning Series, and thank you for sharing your expertise in this area.
Thank you first for identifying conflict as an area of interest for our audience today. As we begin, I'd like for you to complete this sentence. Conflict always happens, therefore. Now, if you're like most of my students, you'll respond with some responses like, we have to be prepared and we have to have a strategy. Research suggests that a typical manager may spend 25% of his or her time dealing with conflicts. Now, that might not seem like a significant amount of time for you, but let's review some common characteristics of the everyday work of a manager. First, your time is often fragmented, meaning that you're just working for a few minutes on one task before being interrupted and moving to the next task. Secondly, your job is overloaded. You have many more direct reports than in years past. So efficiency really does become a core skill. Let's not forget, too, the costs associated with conflict, and these can range from legal fees to losing customers to losing employees. But if you can begin to think reflectively about your approach to conflict and to being prepared and committed to reframing unproductive conflict into productive conflict, it will allow you to achieve much more success in the workplace. Today's learning objectives are to identify some components and causes of conflict that shape our workplace experiences, reflect on our own conflict styles and approaches that we prefer when engaging in workplace conflict, brainstorming strategies for responding to conflict that might move us out of these preferred styles, and lastly, applying conflict concepts and principles. Let's begin with two basic definitions of conflict. In this first definition, I'd like to draw your attention to first the idea that conflict is expressed. And this can mean that it's expressed verbally through raised voices, but not necessarily. You might also be experiencing more of the subtle or more of the nonverbal communication. Secondly, the parties are often interdependent, meaning that they rely upon one another. And these interdependent interactions can be obvious or not so obvious. You might not work together, for example, but you might share some common resources, creating that interdependency. And lastly, the idea of perception. We see this in a number of definitions of conflict. We're often in a conflict because we perceive that we're in one. The idea of perceiving conflict is important to consider because it reminds us that our focus of attention matters. If we look at this common illustration, some of you may see the younger woman, while others may view the older woman. It all depends on your focus of attention. If you look at the red horizontal line towards the bottom third of the illustration, you're either seeing the mouth of the older woman or the necklace of the younger woman. This is a reminder of what you're paying attention to, and you might be missing some important aspects that are there right in front of you. Conflict is complex, and it can arise from a number of causes in the workplace. The first is an uncertain economy. As companies are reorganizing, you feel like you're in a constant state of change. There are changes to processes and procedures. Reporting structures may change. There might be changes in your position description and how you're evaluated. Secondly, threats of downsizing. You might have some employees that feel vulnerable, and you might have other employees that have survived the downsizing feeling a sense of guilt. There might be competition for promotion because fewer positions are available. You might have misplaced loyalties, where individuals are loyal to a person, institution, or organization that you shouldn't be loyal to. Or you might be defending a person or an institution for the wrong reasons. You might be experiencing finger pointing over mistakes where you're placing blame, and this can really hinder your ability to learn. And lastly, job-related stress. This can have physical symptoms or more mental health symptoms. Even if you like what you do, you might experience this job-related stress. These causes of conflict can lead to a loss of self-respect, decreased job satisfaction, and decreased in your overall interest in your work. Because the causes are varied and complex, planning a conflict assessment strategy gives you the opportunity to best match your response to the conflict. Assessing conflict involves taking a step back to evaluate the factors. This could be as simple as asking a few short questions. Who is involved? What's at stake? What's the context? Assessing conflict also involves making informed decisions and purposeful moves as you frame your conflict response. And lastly, practicing self and other awareness. You might refer to this as emotional intelligence, where you're monitoring others' feelings and your own. In the book, we refer to this as a rhetorical sensitivity, where you're very aware of your own position, the perspective of your audience or conversation partner, as well as any constraints within the context. One guide for assessing conflict asks us to think about conflict as a system that involves conflicting parties, the context, and the messages or feedback. You might begin analyzing the conflicting parties. Look at the level of the conflict. Is this a conflict that needs to be handled at an organization level? You might consider the personalities of the individuals involved in the conflict and their conflict management styles. And are the styles appropriate for the nature of the conflict? Can you change the situation as a manager? And if you'd like to do that, you might look at the areas of stress in the work environment that might be caused by workload, might be caused by the social environment, especially if it's not a very highly communicative work environment. The physical environment, if you're working at a place of employment with lots of construction or just distracting loud noises, or concerns over your job because of that fear of downsizing. As a manager, you might also consider the policies, procedures, and norms that might be contributing to conflict. And is there something that you can do to address it from your position? You might also consider the power distribution of the individuals involved in the relationship. Or the trust, does it exist between the parties? And it might take a variety of forms: trust in someone's ability, trust in someone's commitment to the organization, or trust in the other's concern for your own well-being. You might also begin to pay attention to some of the messages or feedback. Verbal aggression, which is verbally aggressive language or name-calling. You might notice some ineffective tactics like kitchen sinking, where individuals are just adding on additional issue after issue without resolving the problem. Nonverbal cues, facial expressions, gestures, lack of eye contact, or an overall defensiveness that might be driven by fear and emotion. And this can often impede one's learning and their ability to build relationships within the workplace. Whenever you better understand conflict by using this systems approach, you can begin to think about your own response to conflict. And most of us do have a preferred way of responding to conflict. If you look at this list here, you might see yourself on this continuum. Are you a person that loves peace and harmony? You like to avoid conflict? Do you like the give and take of a good conflict? Or do you really count on conflict to help clear the air within the workplace? These various approaches connect to different types of conflict management styles. The accommodating style might be for individuals that tend to give in a conflict scenario, make concessions. The avoiding style, where you're not expressing the conflict, you're ignoring the conflict, or you're diverting attention away from the conflict. A competing style is more confrontational with a win-lose situation. Compromising, you're seeking the middle ground, where each party will have to give up something together. And this is often a default strategy. Or collaborating, where you're seeking a creative win-win solution that often builds the relationship as individuals resolve the conflict. Another way of considering these conflict styles is to map them according to two dimensions: assertiveness and cooperativeness. So for example, you'll notice that collaborating involves a high level of assertiveness, meaning that you're focusing on your own needs and your own goals, but you're also highly attentive to the needs, the relationship, the goals of the other person. If you look at the avoiding placement, you'll notice that you're not focusing on your own needs and you're not really focusing on the needs of the other person. Now that we've talked about a few definitions, we've talked about some common causes, we've looked at a systems approach to analyzing conflict, and you've thought a little about your own preferred conflict style, let's apply these ideas to a workplace scenario. As a member of a project team, you are expected to share your ideas with other members, but not all team members' ideas are equally considered. One helpful strategy to begin, it's very easy to remember if you can remember the acronym LARK. It reminds us that listening is often much more important than talking in these conflict scenarios. Listening is a learned skill where you're attending to the whole meaning of the message. It takes a conscious effort. It might even involve asking questions about what happened, who was involved, how were they affected, what do you hope to achieve in the relationship. The second step of acknowledging, where you're restating or reframing from a more negative perspective to a positive perspective, and you're reflecting feelings. Responding using I statements, you might be describing how you feel, describing the situation and why you feel that way. And committing, where you're committed to a marker in the process. It doesn't necessarily have to be a step of closure, a step of final closure, and it's not necessarily a decision for a final course of action moving forward, but you're making just some sort of small commitment to solving the larger conflict problem, and you're committed to deciding on an appropriate course of action. Today, we hope we've helped you identify the sources and causes of conflict, given you the opportunity to think about self and other awareness, the importance of implementing a strategy appropriate for the situation and not just your personal preference. And we hope that you feel a strong commitment to reframing conflict as a learning opportunity that will create a constructive environment to further explore the conflict scenario. Your next steps. We've offered a few resources here. These are 2 assessment tools that will help you determine your preferred style. The Thomas Kilmann instrument is the world's best-selling tool, and the second tool is a free online tool that will allow you to learn your conflict style in just a few minutes. We've also selected just a few books as you further explore conflict and your own learning on the subject. Although conflict is a part of everyday life, we shared some strategies and resources for reframing unproductive conflict into productive conflict that will increase your insight and creative productivity within your workplaces. Thank you.
Amanda, thanks so much for covering that ground for us so well. I appreciate it, and I know our viewers do as well. And it prompts a couple of questions. So the first one that may be on the minds of many is there one conflict style that's more effective than the other? As you've outlined it, conflict, you have to take into account the context, things like time and relationship, and that you have to acknowledge that it's complicated. There's complexity there. So is there a style, one style that's more effective than the other?
That's one of the key takeaways that I hope our audience realize, is that there isn't one style that's going to help in every situation. You really need to adapt your style to fit the context, given the relationship, given the time constraints that you have, given the nature of the issue. So for example, if the issue is unimportant, the relationship is unimportant, you've noticed that both individuals just sort of need a timeout from the scenario, then maybe avoiding is the best option at that moment. If you think about the accommodating style, the issue might be important to the other party, but not to you, or the other party might have legitimate authority to make the final decision. So in that case, obliging or accommodating might be the best option. So it really is context specific.
So in the workplace scenario that you included in your presentation, where it does focus on a team, so we can assume there's time together and relationships exist at the present and going forward. What would you recommend, or what should we consider?
I think that specific scenario illustrates that the harmful effects of avoiding in that case, where you really would encourage that team to communicate about the activities or happening behaviors that are not helping the team achieve its goals. And then you would want to see that team be committed to working together and to, successfully completing the project. But teamwork is difficult, but the more that you can recognize your own preference, you're better able to adapt it to choose a different style if it's more appropriate for that scenario.
That sounds exactly spot on. Another question that I have with having conflict, it's going to exist. So we want to have it be productive. We want to be able to learn together, to learn from it, through it. How do we find that path? What are the practical things that we need to do as individuals and professionals to reframe it so that conflict can be productive for ourselves and those around us in the workplace?
I think there are 2 points to consider here. One is that it often takes time to change our habits. So really focusing on one conversation or one interaction and being committed to adopting a different type of style and really making a conscious effort to practice a style that's outside of your comfort zone. And that can be difficult, but you should also remember that you do not have to do this alone. So a great activity might be to go back to your team or to go back to your department and have an honest conversation about what styles do we tend to see among our team members. Are there certain styles that are rewarded? And are there certain styles that are less valued on our team? Is there a great combination of styles that we can determine together that will really allow us to be a high-performing team?
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise in a way that is so practical and that we can make actionable and obviously expert.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. And now I would like to share with our viewers a few key resources that are available through the university's Alumni Association and specifically the Career Services team. Firstly is our website. At my.nd.edu/career, you will find programs and tools and services that are available to our alumni. Secondly, we have a career advisor who provides support to our alumni, and that is initiated by emailing career@alumni.nd.edu. Thank you.